I was wrong. I recently did a video going over the 3 mainstream graphics cards from each company, and that price point was around $300. Well, the point of that video was to look at just the new offerings. What I didn't consider was the value you can get with going with previous generations. While stock is likely very low right now, there are still a few offerings to be had, especially if you're looking on Amazon. And so today we're going to be taking a look at this monster of a graphics card. Let's get into some testing. So if we actually take a look at the market right now, you could actually pick up an RX 6750 XT or 6700 XT for around that $300 price point on Amazon, which is new. But if we go over to the used market, these things are a killer deal. You can pick one up for around $230 on eBay or around $250 if you look at other places. What sets this graphics card apart from every graphics card we looked at previously is a few things. The first main one is having 12 gigabytes of VRAM. That's a 50% increase, and not to mention that when you're playing at 1440p, a lot of newer titles are definitely going to use that. So having that extra buffer is going to help with that higher resolution. Not to mention that if you compare the amount of stream processors on the 6750 XT versus the 7600, you're getting a pretty significant bump by about 500. And while that's not apples to apples because there is a generational uplift, it is still going to give you a significant uplift in performance. So in my last video, the RTX 4060 came out as the winner in terms of pure performance. While it didn't have that great of value, it was the fastest among the 3 compared. So for that, I want to compare the 6750 XT to the 4060 in 5 benchmarks. And then at the end, we'll take a look at a 5-game average that'll include the 7600. So starting off with Cyberpunk 2077, at 1080p, we are seeing an average of 108 FPS, which is a 20% increase over the 4060. If that increase wasn't enough, bumping up the resolution to 1440p saw that it was 25% faster than the 4060 with an average of 69 FPS. Nice. Not to mention that compared to any other card in this bracket, the 6750 XT was the only one that I would deem playable at 1440p. Moving over to Forza Horizon 5, at 1080p, we were seeing once again a 25% increase over the 4060. This graphics card is pretty much more than enough for any 1080p title. Going up to 1440p did show that the increase in performance did lower slightly versus the 4060, but we were still managing over 100 FPS on average. And a reminder, this is at ultra settings, so there is some ray tracing enabled. Moving over to Hogwarts Legacy, and to be honest, in this title, you're going to want to have more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM because that buffer can fill up pretty fast and you can see some of the textures falling off. Nonetheless, on the performance side, we're still managing 160 FPS on average at 1080p, which is a pretty significant bump up from the 4060. And then jumping up to 1440p, yeah, I mean, you basically can play this title at high settings, 1440p, and still manage a great experience that the other cards wouldn't be able to manage because of that lower VRAM buffer. Spider-Man Remastered was an interesting one. While at 1080p, we didn't see a significant uplift going from the 4060 to the 6750 XT. That's basically because we're CPU bottlenecked right now. Lastly, in Starfield, and finally, we have a graphics card that can manage this game at high settings at 1080p. And I will say, recently, I did take a look at frame generation, and if you're looking to get that great frame generation experience, having that 60 base with the 1% lows above 60 is a must-have just for responsiveness. Bumping up to 1440p, you're only getting about 53 FPS on average, which is an uplift from any other card tested, but I wouldn't exactly call that playable. Luckily, we can enable FSR upscaling, or in my opinion, just go with XeSS. It looks way better, especially at 1440p. So taking a look at the 5-game average at 1080p, and I mean, to be honest, for the same price, you're getting 15% more performance than the 4060. Not to mention that the 4060 and 7600 are about 2% apart. So really, it's a no-brainer when it comes to price to performance. The main attraction of this card, in my opinion, is 1440p gaming. This is going to give you that entry-level 1440p gaming, which you can see is 19% faster than the 4060 and 25% faster than the 7600. While on paper, that looks really good, in which it is, you're really going to be taking the difference between unplayable frame rates on the 7600 and the 4060 and playable frame rates on the 6750 XT, managing that 60 FPS on the 1% lows more often than not. So as a gaming graphics card, the 6750 XT is pretty much your go-to, either buying it on the used market or on the new market. I would recommend this 10 times out of 10 over the 4060 and the 7600 if you're just looking at gaming. There's two things that it really falls behind on in. The first one being video editing and 3D rendering. The 4060 is just going to blast this one out of the water when it comes to 3D rendering, and if you're just looking for video editing, I recommend the 7600. It is better than the 4060 and it has way better support than the 6750 XT. The second thing that this may fall behind on is power consumption. This is to be expected because it is a previous gen card, and if you do want that extreme efficiency when it comes to power consumption, the 4060 is kind of a must-have in that situation. It only consumes about 110 watts on average, while the 6750 XT can consume upwards of 250. But to be honest, those two things are kind of small, especially when considering a budget end system. So if you're looking at purely gaming, the 6750 XT comes out on top. I would even go as far as to say that this thing is going to end up being the next RX 580. If you're looking for a budget graphics card in, let's say, a few years times at that $100 price point, this card is going to fill that slot and allow you to play at 1440p and 1080p very comfortably. It does suck that the current state of the market is you kind of have to pay more for less performance on newer gen stuff, but hey, at least it's nice to see that some stock still hasn't dried up.